All right, welcome everybody to round 3 of New Zealand Nationals 2020. In this debate, we have Auckland Blue on the affirmative and Auckland White on the negative, debating the motion, assuming it were possible, this House would allow you to trade in years of your life to enhance your skills, traits, or appearance. Without further ado, I'd like to invite up the first speaker of the affirmative team.
Can you hear me all right? Traits, appearance, and intelligence are traits that you as an individual cannot change. They're often arbitrary, and the only way that you can change them is going to university or buying beauty products, things that are distinctly limited to wealthy upper classes. What we support is giving everyone in society the ability to change these characteristics and enrich their quality of life. Side with team freedom on our side of the house, as opposed to team repression on that side, which just wants to lock people in to their current circumstances. What do we support in today's debate? We support individuals over 20 being able to trade in years of their life to enhance their skills, traits, or appearances. What does this process look like? 5 things, because it's quite detailed here. Firstly, individuals being given information about this choice and then going home and having discussions with their family. So it's not going to be like administered on the same day as they've gone in to inquire about it. Secondly, this will only be administered to individuals who are proven to be compos mentis and under no duress or not being forced into making this decision. Thirdly, the enrichment in their other qualities and their appearance and their skills will be proportionate to the amount of years that they trade in. Fourthly, the maximum of the amount of years that you can trade in will be 20 years. We believe that this limit is consistent with an individual's ability to trade in these characteristics. And finally, we tell you that individuals are able to choose what they enhance, and they'll make this decision based on why they want to enhance it or their current circumstances. We're going to win today's debate by proving that this policy is principally justified and benefits the lives of individuals who desperately want this technology and to change their current circumstances. 3 substantives for the House. Firstly, why there is a principal obligation on the state to allow individuals to have this choice. Secondly, how this policy improves the lives of individuals who make this trade-off. And Kunli'll split, telling you why this policy has wider societal benefits. Firstly, let's take a look at why there's a principal obligation to provide individuals with this choice. Crucial context here is that we effectively already allow some individuals to make this choice when they decide to go to university and occupy 4 years of their life to enrich their intelligence, their academic ability. We think that this policy is in line with that. Why do individuals then specifically need to be given this choice? 4 reasons for this. Firstly, we tell you that the individual owns their own body and their own life. That means that they should be able to choose what they do with it and what trade-offs they make. If they value something as really important, we think they can make that trade-off. Secondly, we tell you that individuals know what is best for them. Because for a bureaucrat in Wellington, 5 more years of your life might be the most valuable thing to them. But for people who face daily poverty and depression, they may want to make this trade-off. We think that that is justified. It's important to note here that the whole concept of one's life and the amount of years being so important is a distinctly Christian concept that's developed in the West, and we think it's not something that's exclusive to all societies around the world, because a lot of other societies prioritize living in maybe harsher conditions because of like the spiritual enrichment they get from that life. We don't think that there's any reason that we distinctly must prioritize the years of someone's life above all else. Thirdly, we tell you that individuals should have equal opportunity to enhance their skills, appearances, and traits. Importantly, as I addressed in my introduction, the ability to do this under the status quo is confined to a very small group of individuals at the top of society, because these are the individuals who can afford to go to university, who can afford to buy beauty products, who can afford to have speech therapy to stop like the way in which they talk, which prevents them from getting any jobs. What we want to do on our side of the house is open these opportunities up to everyone and give everyone the ability to do this through this method, which is free for the individual, unlike other policies. Finally, we tell you that we should give individuals this choice when their decisions are rational. Crucially, we think that this decision is going to be rational under our side of the house, as we've put measures in to make sure that they are making a sane and compos mentis decision that's not under any duress. Crucially, we think even if there were those restrictions, we think because it's such a significant trade-off and that you're literally trading off years of your life, individuals will be considering this and they have to like talk with their family and doctors before making this decision.
On that point,
we think there's a fundamental principal obligation for the state to allow individuals this right, and we don't want to deprive the individual of this. Before I move on to the practical portion, I'll take a POI.
Okay, so how can an individual make a free choice in this scenario when societal pressures are pushing them to take this, such as beauty standards and what employers are looking for when recruiting someone?
Look, we think that this is a significant decision and trading off years of your life is not something to be smirked at. We think that individuals will be taking this decision seriously, and it's not going to be something just because like you've got a pimple on one place in your face, you are going to take this decision. This is for individuals who face everyday oppression in their lives and who really struggle because of the traits that they were given. That's who we envisage taking this. Okay. Let's now take a look at how this policy improves the lives of individuals who make this choice. Because as I've addressed, the individuals who make this choice are not going to be individuals who are making this trade-off on trivial matters. Like, because I find history difficult at school, that's not going to make me want to completely take away years of my life, because that's a significant trade-off. We think it will be made when individuals' quality of life is significantly lower because of skill, trait, or appearance. What does this look like? It looks like individuals who are bullied or can't get employed for an anomaly in their appearance or how they look or how their face is configured. It looks like individuals who struggle to find jobs because of their intelligence level and then live in systematic poverty because they don't fit in with Western systems of capitalism. What we think on our side of the house is not only that they should have a choice, but their lives are enriched when they get this choice. Why is this? We tell you that they are able to escape from the limiting factor that has shackled them because they're directly able to use this technology to choose to change that trait. So it looks like someone who's been bullied because of the configuration of their face, then being able to change that and escape from the shackles of the bullying, of the oppression that they're faced. It looks like individuals being freed from poverty and inequality that their family has systematically been forced to endure for generations upon generations because of their intelligence level, because of their body build. We tell you that we are able to improve the overall quality of life of these individuals. But secondly, we tell you that the years that they trade off do not significantly affect the net enjoyment that they get from their lives. Why is this? We tell you that even for most people, the very last few 5-10 years of your life aren't that enjoyable. You're generally on like a lot of medication. You're generally in and out of hospital. It's not the most enjoyable time in your life. But specifically, Chair Speaker, it's really important to note that their lives aren't enjoyable for these people who may have faced discrimination or poverty, because living retirement might be great if you can live on a super yacht, but it's not if you're forced to live in your slum because you've been oppressed for your life. Crucially, we give these individuals a way out. We stand in a principally justified stance in today's debate. So proud to propose.
Thank the speaker for their speech and invite up the first speaker of the negative team, Frederica.
Can you guys all hear me? Side F in this debate is forcing people to choose between having a good job and having a long life, between being prettier and keeping your connection to your culture and your religion and everything that makes you who you are. That is a choice that nobody at the age limit of 20 or even at the age of 50 could make. And furthermore, it is a choice that entrenches stereotypes and discrimination and everything that is negative in society. So what are we going to prove in this debate? Two things. Firstly, this choice is fundamentally always illegitimate. And secondly, it's going to tangibly make people's lives worse. But what do we stand for then? Quite clearly, for this technology not being used. But furthermore, we stand for the gradual change that is already existing towards accepting all people as pretty or talented or different, however they are, and for means of social support, for example, scholarships for those in poverty, being extended further in order to address this more sustainably. 3 points for the House today. Firstly, why can people not rationally decide to use this? Secondly, why will it have a negative impact on society? And thirdly, why does it distort the value of life? That's what Millie's going to split on. Firstly, though, let's address a couple of points that Isaac decided to make. One of the key parts of his speech was equality and how this is going to lead to poor people or people who've been bullied in their lives suddenly getting a better quality of life equal to those who have more. A couple of responses here. 3. Firstly, they've acknowledged that there is a way for some people who are already more privileged, for example, through going to university, to change these traits. And we're really glad that they brought us that up because it exactly exists on our side too. Nobody wants to die earlier. We are still going to see people who are rich and have money do this in a way that avoids them dying earlier. Instead, you are forcing poorer people to literally give up their lives in order to get a job. And no matter the quality of that life and whatever they might say about that, that is still fundamentally an even worse form of equality. Secondly, though, I will integrate a bit of rebuttal on how this equality will worsen in my point. But thirdly, in terms of what they've talked about the individual quality of life getting better if people have a negative quality, for instance, they talk about people who get bullied, we're still through this reinforcing the perception that whatever that person got bullied for is a bad thing and that people should change it if they have this particular quality. And that is simply going to lead to more widespread bullying of people who are the same. Another key thing that Isaac chose to address, which again, I will integrate some rebuttal, is about how people have autonomy over their lives and know what's best. Here again, I'll point out that their characterization already undermines this in terms of talking about how poor people have such an awful life and they have no alternative but to go to this. Secondly, though, they've kind of just said that an information campaign and a mental health assessment will deal with that. We tell you that it's not that a person is ill, but it's that there is enormous societal pressure of feeling like you need to change yourself because you aren't worth what you are already. They can't say that people who are happy with their lives and in a particularly good mental position will make this choice because those are fundamentally not the people who feel like they need to. It is the people who, no thank you, feel like that. Yeah, okay, I'll take a few actually.
Smoking is a practice which has statistically been shown to reduce an individual's life. Would you allow smoking on your side of the house?
Look, if somebody makes a conscious choice to smoke and they feel like that is fine, then yes. However, if it is because in those countries where there is societal norm to smoke, then of course we think that campaigns against that and supporting people to get off smoking is the far better thing to do. Firstly then, why is this fundamentally an illegitimate choice? Let's take a look at firstly how this would affect the point. A government, first and foremost, has an obligation to protect people's right to life. And this is particularly strong if it's not a rational choice that we're making. So we think that if we can prove this point, that's debate-winning material and this policy should not go ahead. But 2 main reasons why it's irrational. And this is based on groups of people who would likely to do it. Firstly, we think that people who are kind of coming to that time of their age limit, the 20s, 30s, who don't understand how long life can be and why it's valuable, simply because they don't have a lot of experience or don't know a lot of people maybe who have died, are likely to make this choice because they face significant barriers to building up their career or pressure to look good and meet a partner at this time in their life. And they think that achieving these short-term goals is far easier if they can just do it and not sacrifice a lot. And we think it's particularly bad if people like this make such a choice because they will come to regret it later. Isaac wanted to tell us that people are going to die in misery, and so it doesn't really matter whether they're sacrificing much. But we think that regardless of what people's lives actually look like at the end, not having the knowledge of like, could I have had 2 more years with this person who I've absolutely fallen in love with, is still going to lead to people who are approaching the end of their life having significant mental repercussions. Secondly, though, we think there's massive coercion. We live in a world where value is based on economic value, or beauty is supposedly going to make you happier.
Yeah.
So firstly, we'll see that there's a subjective feeling that if you like are more skilled, you will be able to get this job or get into second-year law if you can pass the exam. And that's going to lead people to make this choice. Secondly, though, we think once we see this initial uptake, it becomes an expectation. Even if F want to make it illegal, we are going to see employers not hiring people unless they've kind of maxed their productivity potential. This is analogous, for instance, to racial discrimination. It's also illegal, but it happens fundamentally because people feel like they need to employ the most qualified person. So at the end of this, we show it's not a rational choice. Secondly, though, and more importantly, why is this negative for society? We think, firstly, for the individual, there is a major harm if people start dying earlier because there's more grief in society, they regret when their end of life is coming. But even if F can prove to us that this isn't so harmful, we think the societal ramifications are far more important. And there's 3 key things here. Firstly, we are reinforcing stereotypes that exist in society. These are already particularly harmful, but as people go through their lives and learn to live alongside people who look differently or speak differently or have a different background, these stereotypes are gradually getting unpicked. And we think this gradual change is incredibly valuable, but they're giving it up completely on their side of the house. At the point where a Black person who is confronted with white beauty standards thinks, oh, if I can look this way and be the same as everyone else, and then I'll just be able to get a job or get some more friends, we think people are going to make that choice because it's harder for an individual to fight against a system that is oppressing them than it is for that individual to give up a little bit of their life, even if it's not necessarily the best choice for that individual. So across a society, more broadly, we see stereotypes being entrenched, ideas that you have to be beautiful being entrenched, and that's fundamentally negative. Secondly, then, how this would increase discrimination against people who choose not to make this. And we think are probably going to play up that like this is a free choice, so some people might not make it, but let's look at what actually happens to those people then. We think there's a couple of reasons, firstly, that people are going to opt out. Firstly, they might have particular ethical considerations. Secondly, if they just can't afford it, it could be quite expensive. It's not something they're modeled in. And thirdly, if they come from like particular cultural or religious groups that don't approve. And we think it's particularly bad if these people are not going to do it. These are already people who are oppressed in society. And if they then get oppressed even more, that's particularly harmful. For instance, if your Muslim faith teaches you that Allah made you in his image and thus you don't want to change yourself, but that means you're sacrificing a job because you're not productive enough for it, we are taking away the income and the culture. F have to take away either the income or the culture that make these people essential. Thirdly, very briefly, we also lead to less innovation in society. Learning things progressively over time means that you see how things could be done better or differently, or you find out what personally makes you happy. And that is also a fundamental benefit that we only get on our side of the house. Proud to stand for people's choice, proud to oppose.
I thank the speaker for their speech and would like to invite of the Affirmative team.
Can everyone hear me? The problem with the case of the negating team is that all the problems they point to in society, things like racism, things like employers choosing based on merit, are things that are never going to go away. And the problem with their case is that they haven't recognized that our side is the only side that gives people who are traditionally marginalized, who have never had access to education, who have never had access to resources, the ability to make the same transaction that their wealthy peers are already making in the status quo. That is the important comparative in this debate. That's what I'm going to focus on my speech. Three things. Firstly, I'm going to talk to you about the principal contention in this debate. Secondly, I'm going to talk to you about the quality of life of these individuals. And thirdly, I'm going to split and talk to you about equality and progress. So firstly then, let's talk about this principal contention, because they told you, the negating team told you that people can't make a rational decision. Three responses. Firstly, we tell you that this is an important and weighty decision that people are going to be making within their lives. In the same way that people think about euthanasia, the same way they think before major surgeries, people are going to be making a rational decision when they think about whether or not they're going to be selling years of their lives in order to improve their situation. We tell you that that is true for many of the people, for people who make decisions all around the world today. We don't see why this is different. Secondly, we tell you that people actually already make this decision, right? Because people sell like years of their lives to go to university or to go to a school or like join a doctorate program in order to like enrich their skills, enrich their traits, and enrich their abilities, right? We tell you that people already make these transactions. The only difference then is that our side of the house gives the ability for people who don't have access to those transactions to have access to those types of transactions. That's an important comparative in this debate. But secondly, thirdly, and finally, we tell you that currency in of itself is a manifestation of what we're talking about in this debate. Because when you earn money, you're essentially earning, like you're selling your time for that money and then using that money to buy things that you want, right? And so like in this point is in many ways a transaction of time in order to get people trade the hours that they've worked in order for a better house today, or like instead of like saving up for their retirement, people make those types of decisions every single day. That's a rational decision that people make. Secondly, then, they were talking about societal pressure and how this is going to be pressuring people to make decisions. Look, we tell you that the pressure for people to become smarter or to become more like athletic or to become more attractive already exists in the status quo, right? Like employers already look for who is the smartest person, who is like the most attractive for this modeling position, right? Like this type of societal pressure already exists. It's very difficult for their side of the house to remove this societal pressure in any way, and they haven't actually talked to us about how they plan to go about removing this societal pressure. But secondly, we tell you that if it is the case then that these societal pressures for people to become better already exists, then it is important for us to ensure that the poorest people in our society, the people who don't have access to these institutions, do have the ability then to match this expectation, because they have no, like in an employment like market, the poor people have no way to match the people who are like really wealthy, right? So that those people are already suffering based on this meritocratic system that they have. Yes, I'll take a PY.
It is true that the government right now regulates, for instance, the number of hours you can trade full time, the kind of conditions you can legally work in, even if you are earning money by your own free choice. Would you be willing to remove all kinds of employment regulation?
Employment regulation is a different type of regulation to the regulation that we're talking about, right? Like we have limits on the amount of years that you're able to trade, but like, well, fundamentally, the difference is that our side of the house is talking about a regulation that people don't even have access to at all, whereas your side of the house is talking about like people needing to have the ability to sleep 8 hours a night. Okay, the last thing to talk about here is how that they said that people don't understand death and therefore going to make this decision willy-nilly. Like, we think this is kind of a ridiculous point, right? People understand what death is. People understand how permanent death is. Everyone has a member of their family, like people, especially people who are living in poverty, they're going to know about death the most in this debate. We think that's quite clear. Okay, secondly then, let's talk about quality of life, because we think it's important here because we win this debate if the quality of the lives of these individuals improve. Let's talk about three things. Firstly, they talk to you about how poor people throw away their lives and their life is just like now ruined because of this policy. Why is this not the case? Firstly, they didn't respond to any of Isaac's material about how the last like 10 to 20 years of someone's life are usually not as like beneficial to them and like not as enjoyable. But secondly, and most importantly, the people who are likely to enact this policy are exactly the type of people who live really bad retirement lives. They don't have the ability to save up for a retirement. So they probably still have to work like a minimum wage job when they're 60 to 80 years old. They don't have the ability to like save up and like go live a great life during those years. We think it's incredibly important for the negating team to recognize that fact. Secondly, then talking about stereotypes. Look, stereotypes are going to exist on both sides of the house, and if they're going to talk about stereotypes, like how do people who get discriminated based on having dark skin, how are those people ever going to like escape from the ramifications of that stereotyping? Finally, then, talking about religion, look, people who are religious already make trade-offs based on the life that they're living and the value of their religion, right? Like, if they value their religion so much, then they are going to like sacrifice parts of their lives for that religion. That doesn't change on our side of the house. Okay, now I want to talk to you about my split point, about equality and progress. I've talked a lot about individuals in this debate, but we think it's also really important to mention that our side of the house has significant benefits for societies as a whole, right? And we tell you that this is part of this debate because governments have an obligation to improve society.
On that point.
Two things. Firstly, I want to talk to you about how this is a fundamental, effective, and universal equalizer in society. What does this mean? This means that no matter where you come from in your life, no matter what part of society you come from, you have the access to the same transaction that enables you to get the same amount of skills, right? Why is this so important? This means that people who don't like have access to like the best schools in Auckland or have the access to the best family or whatever, those people have the same access to transactions that are available to the people at the very top. That's an important point in this debate. Yes.
Okay, so given that you say that elderly lives don't have that higher value, would you be willing to allow these people to essentially die to coronavirus in order to save the economy and benefit those who are younger to improve their quality of life?
People on our side of the house are making an active choice, right? People are active, and like, look, honestly, there's nothing stopping an elderly person from going outside and catching coronavirus if they really want to die, right? Like, so people here at our side of the house are making an active decision, and we tell you that this is the decision that they're weighing up, right? They're weighing up this decision. Don't understand how this has got anything to do with like us killing elderly people. Okay, secondly then, I'll tell you that the access, this equalizer is important because the access is universal. Everyone has access to this, and that's really important. Secondly then, we tell you that progress in society is massively benefited, right? Like people are less subject to poor conditions because, as outlined, people living in like total poverty are able to change their situation by improving their skills, by getting access to important traits that they want to enter industries that they want to enter. But secondly, we tell you that we can solve imminent human and global challenges that we aren't able to solve in the status quo, simply because of the fact that we're able to get this like large, broad change in like broad intelligence or broad capabilities of our society. We're able to solve problems like climate change much more quickly. We're able to mobilize our population in order to solve these problems. That's a really important comparative in this debate. So at the end of my speech, I've explained to you why this right that people have is so incredibly important. Secondly, I've told you why this improves the quality of life. And thirdly, I've talked to you about how this is greatly beneficial for society in terms of equality and progress. Extremely proud to propose.
I thank the speaker for their speech and invite up the second speaker of the negative team, Millie.
People fundamentally can't make free choices about their life because people fundamentally are unable to comprehend death. People never understand fully the feeling of losing all relationships 5, 10, 20 years too early. They don't understand the fact that they will never be able to fully fulfill their goals because years will be shaved off their life. All they can understand when they're 20 is the extra income they can get from a better job, the better boyfriend they can get from being more attractive, begin to internalize those concerns and make a frankly, fundamentally irrational choice. This is not a debate about letting poor people be more empowered. It's about stopping poor people from being exploited and being forced to die 20 years too soon. Today, I'm going to deal with 4 things in my speech. First of all, can this principally ever be made freely? Second of all, is this choice one that is empowering for the individual? Thirdly, is this choice one that is empowering for society? And then finally, some substantive contribution about why this meaningfully distorts how we value human life. First of all, on this idea of how choice can ever be made freely, this is really crucial material because if we can prove this, the whole debate falls in our favor. It is unable for them, so it is just unable for an individual to be able to die without their meaningful consent. There are a couple of contentions brought to us by side proposition. They told us first that this isn't necessarily a massively weighty decision, so they're going to go home and ponder it. Okay, they'll go home and ponder it, but they won't go home and ponder it with full information. Because when you're 20, you might think that you're doing all the thinking, but you don't understand what it means to die. You don't understand what it means to like die at 70. Like no one can actually comprehend that until far like down the track. You can think that you're doing all the thinking, but they've never proven to us why you're going to have full and free information. We tell you that sitting at a doctor's appointment and then telling you, well, look, it's going to kind of suck because you might die when you're 70, because you only see old people under their narratives of old person's lives not being particularly valuable. You won't understand the value of the relationships with your grandchildren at that age. You won't understand the relationships with your church or your community that you're going to get. They're going to exist in a world with those kinds of awful narratives about old people while also not understanding the value of those lives. Secondly, they told you that people already do this by going to university. Frankly, this was very insulting for like every university student, right? Like this is totally different. When you go to university, you're still able to engage in communities. You're still able to have relationships with other people. You're still able to like develop your own personal goals and all that. We tell you it's not losing your life. That's giving part of your time for money, but it's also like, you know, doing things that meaningfully benefit you in that kind of way. Dying is totally unanalogous to this kind of decision. Then they told you it was analogous to income. The fact is, this was really hypocritical. Why? Because Cunley was really happy to stand for types of employment regulations, things which said that you can't work for 10 hours a day for more money. If they want to empower poor people to literally do whatever they want to improve their material circumstances, they should be happy to let them do that. The fact is, they understand that people can't meaningfully consent to work 16-hour days. That's because people are often exploited and forced to make these choices. At the point that we can believe that employers can probably meaningfully coerce people into accepting these kinds of conditions, to accepting a shorter life, which we proved to you they did, and their response to it was just frankly inadequate. They didn't really do anything. We tell you that sort of coercion is going to exist and we're legitimate in banning it. Then they told us also that they were happy to cap this policy at 20 years. If people can meaningfully consent to end their own life, why isn't it as much time as they want? If they recognize there is a limit to the amount a person can meaningfully consent, we tell you there is always going to be an inability for them to consent. Their own model breaks their case. Then moving on to the second point of clash, is this choice one that is empowering for the individual? There were two main points that we heard from side proposition. First of all, they told us that a person's life is not worth living at the point they don't have material benefit if they don't perceive so. Like, this is just massively damaging rhetoric that we think gets inside people's head and go to coerce them to these kinds of bad choices. Because if you tell someone that just because they are poor doesn't mean they have as much of a valuable life as someone who is wealthy, it means you're going to massively pressurize poor people into doing something they wouldn't otherwise do. We tell you the value of life comes from things that people cannot quantify, particularly things they can't quantify when they're younger. Things like relationships, things like an access to a community. These are things people can't think about crucially are what makes life valuable. We tell you that whether or not you are the wealthiest person or the poorest person, you have the access to relationships. We tell you the government has an obligation to preserve lives. In order to preserve those relationships, to preserve those communities, they're destroying those. That's destroying the lives. Second of all, I told you you give a person a capacity to meaningfully improve their lives. I'm going to move on to this material in about 2 seconds, but you only improve their lives in ways that are certain set within a social status quo, which we think is going to be further entrenched under our side of the house. You're not improving their lives under their criteria, rather you're improving their lives on a criteria that society has set out for them that's particularly disempowering. Now onto this. They told you that discrimination didn't matter because discrimination was going to happen under our third world. This just wasn't true. We tell you in the last few years, there's been meaningful steps in movements such as Black is Beautiful to change narratives around what is beautiful, what is intelligent, what is valuable in society. We tell you that changes because there are individuals that fundamentally can't change certain characteristics about themselves. Their race, their natural level of intelligence. Society has to adapt to be able to accommodate them. That's crucial because at the point you can tell those people, well, if you want a job, if you want a boyfriend, you're going to have to genetically modify yourself. You suddenly mean that you don't have to have that social impetus to fight against discrimination. That's really important because you're going to begin to entrench those social biases rather than make this important progress to destroying those discriminatory things. That's also particularly crucial because their policy is necessarily going to leave people behind with certain ethical concerns. This means individuals with particular mental illnesses who choose, for instance, to not seek this therapy and to seek this treatment are going to be locked out of employment because there's going to be no impetus for employers to adapt and allow these people to enter the workplace comfortably. That's really crucial in today's debate. Then briefly also on Kunli's split, they told us people are going to escape poverty. Frankly not. Poverty is a relative thing. There are always going to need to be like trash collectors. Therefore, people are going to waste years on their life to essentially be stuck in the same conditions because everyone in their social situation is going to be doing it. It's going to afford them no major benefit. Then finally, about solving climate change, like we honestly don't care. Frankly, at the point that you make marginal steps towards science, we'd rather people stay alive. The point of science is to keep people alive longer. I'll take a PY now if there is one.
Do you have any path to actually help that individual who's systematically been locked out of education and any opportunity to improve their lives and get out of poverty?
Yeah, free university, free subsidies to allow families to keep their children in education, subsidies to allow them to access things like sports and musical training, also things like just allowing people to have more free choice, stopping legal barriers from people accessing education across the world. That's what we're wanting to do. That's, I think, a reasonable thing we can stand behind and we'll fix it. Now, why this meaningfully distorts how we value life as a whole, this is really crucial because we think these kinds of narratives change fundamentally the way we engage with life. A couple of reasons we do this. First of all, people begin to view their lives as just the sum of certain traits. We tell you the traits that are necessarily going to be prioritized in these kinds of decisions can be ones that are most economically beneficial to these kinds of people. Why? Because as they told you, the main people who are going to be going for these things want better jobs, they want better boyfriends, they want these kinds of things that are really superficial, really material. That means that an individual begins to equate the value of their life in like years in capacity to these particular traits. We think this kind of narrative would like entrench the idea that the life of a beautiful person is far more than the life of an ugly person. The life of an intelligent person is worth far more. Additionally, we tell you it entrenches narratives about the lives of elderly people being frankly bad because we tell you that we're willing to trade off things like a person's capacity to live to 80 for their ability to be more beautiful. What does this fundamentally do? First of all, it decreases incentive for us to invest in the healthcare and support of elderly people because we tell them through social narratives that their lives are not nearly as valuable as the lives of the young, of the lives of the economically productive. But second of all, we tell people that are ugly, tell people that are less intelligent, that their lives don't have meaning, that they're not important, and that they don't deserve to be socially valued nearly to the degree of other people. Even if they tell you that's a free choice, that's not a choice that should ever have to be made. Proud to something.
I thank the speaker for his speech and would like to invite up the third speaker of the affirmative team, Grace.
The negating team in today's debate wanted to rest their case on the idea that 20-year-olds can't make a rational, informed decision. That simply wasn't our case, because all we need to be able to defend in terms of the principal obligation is that people deserve to have this obligation somewhere down the line. We don't think it's true that this decision has to be made at 20, or that many people will actually be making it at 20 years old. What that means then is that these people will have time to try to make their lives better, will have time to try to overcome the systematic oppression that they face within society, and at the point at which they fail to do that and see no more hope for the rest of their lives, we give them that choice to improve their life. 3 points of clash for the House today. Firstly, we'll discuss the principal obligation under each side of the House. Secondly, which side gets better societal outcomes, and thirdly, which side gets a better quality of life for the individuals that we care about in today's debate. So let's begin with the principal obligation. What did we hear from Neg? As I flagged in my introduction, the negating team's push here was only to tell us that like 20-year-olds can't make this decision. They weren't able to weigh up the value of their lives. The first response here is to tell you that there are some young people who will be able to make this decision. And the reason for that is because it is a weighty decision. Those 20-year-olds know the value of life. Those 20-year-olds fear death even more than someone who's older. They're going to be people who don't want to die, who don't want to risk dying, and who know that they have their years ahead of them. What this means then is that they're likely to go into in-depth discussion with their family members. And here's where we don't accept the negating team's characterization that a young person is never able to understand the value of relationships in their older years, because we think that they're likely to have connections with their parents, to have connections with their grandparents. You're able to discuss with those people, and if those people tell you that they really value their lives because of the relationships that they've developed, they're able to take that into account. We think 20-year-olds are able to take that kind of advice. What happens then? What happens to these 20-year-olds? What's different outside of the house is when your grandparent comes to you and tells you, hey, I don't think my life was worth it because I had to suffer for 60, 70 years of my life. I would rather have had a better quality of life, been able to provide for your parents, been able to provide a better life for you, for my future generations, and had a life that I prefer more. But the second response here is to tell you that it's not actually only 20-year-olds who are going to do this. It's only going to be a small portion of 20-year-olds to do this. We think the negating team just tried to jump on this one fact that we said that the minimum age would be 20 and then run with it, and not actually accept the practical consideration, which is to tell you that those people are likely to, if you're 20, you're likely to live a few more years of your life. You're not going to rush into it. You're going to test the kinds of things that you your ability to improve your life. You're going to have hope that your life will be able to improve somewhere in the future. You're going to try to make it the best that you can. At the point at which you realize that everything you've tried has failed and turned against you and left you completely locked out of a system and a society that oppresses you, give you that decision to change your life. Then what did we tell you that the negating team hasn't actually responded to beyond trying to tell us that the rational decision wasn't true? They ignored the material that Isaac gave you about how it's a choice of bodily autonomy. You have the autonomy to do what you wish with your body. They ignored the material around how people have different values of their life. They value their life differently. They might not value longevity, and they might value being able to live their life to the fullest in the short term. And we think that's a decision that's perfectly rational to make, because as Isaac told you, the idea that living a long life is the best life is something that's a Western Christian belief, and we don't see the negating team has never given us a practical reason why a longest life is the best life when you can still have those relationships in the short term. Lastly, under this point, then they tried to tell us that they tried to bring up some examples of employment regulation. We tell you employment regulation isn't the same thing because it makes your quality of life worse in the short term. It makes your everyday living worse. This is not the same thing as giving up the years at the end of your life. And with university, it's the same. We think that when you spend 4 years at university, those are necessarily years that you exchanged because you weren't able to go do something else with your life because you were stuck in the same place, going to the same courses for 4 years. I'll take a POI.
If it is true that you think that most poor people are going to adopt this treatment, why won't it all level out and then just meaningfully improve no one's lives because everyone has the maximum make you more intelligent thing?
We think that's fine because everyone is going to have a better quality of life because they're no longer bullied or discriminated against for those things that they can't change. We think it's fine if you raise everyone's standard of living because that's exactly what we're trying to do when we have development economics, is try to lift everyone to a better standard of life. On the idea of society, then, the next push here was that you would reinforce stereotypes and increase discrimination. If the first response, the base level response, is tell you that people who are in minorities are quite proud. We think that Black people are quite proud to be part of that community. They're not going to turn their backs on a community that has supported them, on a community that they highly identify with, on a community that they would literally die to support. We don't think that those people are going to turn their backs on those communities. But secondly, then, the negating team highlights just how far-fetched and entrenched these issues are when people will give up years of their life to change it. We think at the point at which the population and the general society sees that someone is willing to give up years of their life simply because they're Black, this shows society exactly how serious this problem is. This creates a huge amount of public backlash and social pressure on governments to solve this problem, because there are obviously going to be people who think it's completely ridiculous and who are going to be angry about the fact that the situation has gotten so bad that Black people feel like they have no choice but to give up years of their life to change it. What this means is that we're the side of the house that actually gets social change, because the negating team was never able to prove to us how, if we just continue down the same track and never put enough pressure on our governments, why you won't just get more Black people dying in the streets every day. And even if they do get change, it's going to be far more gradual than the kinds of change we get when you get a visceral reaction to finding out that your friend gave up years of their life to change something about them. We think that the only reason we think that we need change that is fast, and the only way that you get like social change that is fast is when you change these. This is where they tell us, and this is where their material about like not valuing old people or people who don't live up to beauty standards doesn't hold, because we think that we think that we get them better lives and show the value of their lives when we get social change, when we get pressure on our governments. Lastly, under this point of clash, Millie told us that they don't care about solving climate change. When Quinley brought you a split, they told you that like climate change is only to add years to your life, and they would prefer that you just save those years of your life. Anyway, we tell you that's incredibly naive when you consider that like climate change is likely to affect more than just your life. It's going to be more than 20 years of your life, but it's going to be the next 1,000, 10,000 years of the future generations. We think it's incredibly selfish of the negating team to say that they don't care about climate change because it's not going to affect their own lives that much. Lastly, on the individual's quality of life, here we don't think the negating team ever gave us enough to win this point of clash. And we think that it's quite clear. The first idea here is to tell you that the years traded off aren't that great anyway. If your situation is so bad that you're willing to trade off years of your life, your retirement was never going to be that great. Your retirement was likely to be plagued with pain and diseases that you didn't have the money to fund, didn't have the money to get treatment for. Secondly, then they told us that the access to relationships meant that the access to relationships you got in your later years of life meant that like made up for the quality of life. We tell you that your access to relationships is not enough when you're going to starve on a daily basis, when you can't afford treatment to like get rid of terminal pain or like chronic pain, and when you face like daily slurs and insults from people that you would rather change. Lastly, then, Millie tried to tell us that they would support free universities and subsidies. We tell you that the systematic barriers that exist to university, for example, how far you live away from university, for example, the fact that you might have to work to support your family, and so you can't afford to waste your time going to university, means that simply supporting things like free university is never going to equal the playing field in a way that is meaningful, in a way that gets those people a significant change in the quality of life. At the end of this debate, we're the side of the House that actually stands for a principal obligation and stands for improving individual and society quality of life. We're proud to affirm.
I thank the speaker for his speech and would like to invite up the third speaker of the negative team, Jack.
You mind if I just grab my charger? It's like right there. It's on my phone's at 1%, just so I can time myself. The affirmative side of the House today supports a homogenized society where everyone becomes the same. This is incredibly harmful because if someone who is African American decides to change their appearance to become more white, we think all this does is further entrench and increase stereotypes and racism and ideas surrounding white people being superior. That's something they have failed to deal with in today's debate, and that is why they have lost today's debate. 3 main points of clash for you today. Firstly, is this a fair and free choice? Secondly, what is the wider societal impact? And then thirdly, how does this impact on the individual? So firstly, onto this point of clash about, is this a fair and free choice? So they told us at first that it was the principal obligation of the state to provide this choice to people, but this obligation relies on it being a fair and free choice. So at the end of this day, this point really boiled down to what our substantive material was, right? So let's first look at why do people make this choice when young? Because this was a contention in today's case, because they wanted to say that people wouldn't always make it when they're young. So firstly on this, they said that like, oh, people will wait a few years. Like, if they make it at 20 or 25, either way, they're very young and it's still harmful in that sense. But 3 reasons why they will make this choice when they are young. So firstly, they've just had to work like really hard at school and like try really hard and study really hard and gone through all that journey. And now they're looking at like 4 or 5 years more of university study, of really hard work. What are you thinking in that scenario? You're thinking, I don't really want to have to go through that hard work, so I want to take this choice in order to just like be smart now and get a job now, right? So they want to avoid it. Secondly, we think that like we can't really focus on like the future when we are in the present, right? And like as Millie said, we fail to contemplate death, but also like we fail to just like contemplate our future, and we make choices based on our present circumstances, right? Like this is why like people choose to smoke and things of that nature. But thirdly, when people are older, they're less likely to make this decision as they value time more, right? For example, they value like time with their kids, a few extra years and like teaching their kid how to play a sport and things of that nature. And also it has a less of an impact on their life. So now that I've proven why they will make this choice when they are younger, let's now look at why this isn't a fair and free choice. So 3 main reasons for this for you today. So firstly, at 20 years old, which is where most people will be making the choice, you can't really put your future above your current circumstance, right? You're only thinking about your current circumstance and like thinking about like wanting to get a job in the near future and how competitive the current scene is, how competitive jobs are. And so you're thinking in that mindset and you will be pushed into this. Secondly, societal pressures. Now, they tried to tell us that societal pressures occur on either side of the house. But like we told you that we slowly phase out these societal pressures and we continue to do so like has been happening in like the 21st century. But also they increase these societal pressures as there is actually people taking up this choice. And when other people take up this choice, there is more pressure on you to then take up this choice as well, right? Because it's pressure thinking, oh, wow, everyone else is taking up this choice. If I want to get a job, I have to as well, because otherwise I'm not going to be as smart as everyone else. So there's way more societal pressure on their side of the house, and also more means to act on that societal pressure because they can actually change it in a meaningful way by taking years off their life. Thirdly, those who are poor or minorities who they wanted to talk about making these changes and how it's so good for them feel extra pressure to take these choices. So these poor people, these minorities actually have less of a fair and free choice because of these circumstances, because of the pressures maybe by their family saying you need to take this choice so we can get out of the poverty cycle. That's a crucial point in today's debate that they did not want to grapple with, and actually a contention in their case because they said that all these poor people are going to take this choice because they're in such desperate circumstances, but wanted to say this was a very sane and calculated choice. That doesn't work together. So at the end of this point, it's very clear to see that this is not a fair and free choice, right? And they tried to relate it to university, but I think we've clearly rebutted that right down the line with like the experiences, social life and things of that nature that you get out of university. And so it's clear to see that this is not a fair and free choice, and this is not something that we believe people can make because they're not able to understand and grapple with the concept of something like death. So now moving on to the second point of clash, how does this impact on society? So they told us that they help these minorities, right, who have a poor quality of life and will now be able to improve their quality of life. 2 main responses to this for you today. Firstly, if there's loads of people making this decision, loads of poor people making this decision, they are now facing the exact same problem, right? Because they will have to take years off their life, huge risk, a huge, takeaway, to now essentially not improve their circumstances because everyone else is now smarter as well and they still won't be able to compete for the jobs. This isn't as much of a problem for the privileged in society because they will be able to get by even if they don't have this education simply on their money. These poor people still need a job, even if they're smarter. If everyone else is, they're still not going to be able to get a job and their situation doesn't improve. However, their side takes years off their life, so it's actually worse. Secondly, those who don't take it are hugely disadvantaged, as employers will now blame them for their situation instead of, saying, oh, these people are disadvantaged and unlucky in society. No, they're not, because they could have taken years off their life. That's how employers will be thinking, and they will blame them for their situation. This is like clear discrimination that occurs on their side of the house, and is actually particularly important in like religious cases where someone like is refusing to make this decision because they believe in like a long life is a good life, and therefore they are discriminated against because of that, and because that is their religion. So what were our alternatives? So as Millie told you, we propose like subsidies and free education and lots of things that Millie told you, right? And this gradual progressive change that we've seen occurring in the 21st century. However, they don't get this because there is less, it is mutually exclusive, because there is less tolerance and sympathy by employers and by people, and also by like the political sector, because like people had the chance to like make this choice and they didn't. And so there's less likely to be political support in terms of like benefits, which creates more frequent poverty on their side of the house because those in poverty receive less support, right? There simply isn't going to be an increase in jobs just because people are more smart. That's not how it works. We also told you that they created a homogenous society and they didn't really respond to this. Why is this important? This is important because of a lack of diversity, and a lack of diversity leads to a lack of societal change because everyone is the same and they're just reaffirming their opinions. This means we don't get positive progress on societal issues, but it also means that someone, for example, if they are black and they they change their appearance to be more white, that just further reinforces the idea that like white people are superior and like racist opinions of many people, and further enforces this kind of racism, right? So at the end of this point, we clearly decide that better impacts society by keeping it diverse and actually not like increasing poverty like they do. So now looking at the individual impact on people. So they tried to tell us that like the last few years of someone's life don't matter. Okay, 4 responses to this for you today. So firstly, it does if they have family, right? Because they want to spend this time with their family, with their grandkids, quality time with them. That is something that is priceless and many people value as like the best experience in their lives. That's why people have children. It's ridiculous to say that this is important. Secondly, what if they die young, right? If they're dying at a young age, the difference between being like 40 and like 45 or 50 could be like massive and really be those best years of their life, which they really wanted. They failed to grapple with that. Thirdly, it reduces the value and quality of life, right? Which is what Millie brought you in a split, and they didn't really respond to when life is just reduced to being more meaningless than like economic position. But fourthly, it helps other people. When you're older, you help other people, you teach them new skills and you help them to learn things. This may look like teaching someone to play a sport or something of that nature. So the end of today's debate, not only are we the side that actually doesn't stand for them having this choice forced on them, we're the side that better impact society, we support diversity, proud.
I thank the speaker for his speech. As is traditional, we'll now reverse speaking roles by the teams. So I'd like to invite up the negative reply speaker.
When talking literally about life and death, it felt awfully flippant for side affirming to come out and tell you that if you are poor and elderly, your life has no value. Value of life is not something which can be quantified in a dollar bill or in the look of a face or a body. Rather, it's quantified in the relationships and communities. We oftentimes don't recognize how important they are until they are suddenly gone. Today, I'm going to do three things in my speech. First of all, I'm going to deal with the principal contention about whether or not this decision can ever be free and fair. Second of all, the impacts on the individual. Note this is the material that side AF wanted to win on. And then thirdly, the impacts on society writ large. First of all, principally, can this decision ever truly be free or fair? There were two contentions within this point of clash. First of all, can people ever rationally deal with this choice in order to make a good decision for themselves? There was two key things under here. First of all, how old would they be? This was like kind of a tangential thing. We told you from the beginning that we think people are probably going to be quite young because that's the period of time in where you want to extract the most economic value from your life, so you're going to make those choices, but also the time that you're less likely to like make those rational choices. But regardless if you're 20 or if you're 50, we tell you that no person can ever truly quantify life and death. The reason we let people sign contracts for money or sign contracts to buy houses is people can rationally understand what a house is. People can like go and look at a house, they can understand what home ownership looks like. Frankly, talking to the couple of 60-year-olds in your life doesn't ever have a full picture of what being elderly looks like, what a life looks like, what dying looks like. These are concepts so big that people even moments away from them can't deal with them. We tell you we should never let individuals make choices that fundamentally ruin the capacity to enjoy those things, regardless of age. They can never have full information. It will be a free choice. But second of all, things about coercion, because we tell you that if you're poor, if you have no opportunities, employers are going to expect you to want to do this. They're going to expect it when they tell you that you're poor because you didn't make enough sacrifices. You're not getting a job because I did so much to get this job. All you did was waltz into a university, get a degree and leave. You didn't give up truly enough for this job. We tell you there's going to be coercion in families when they tell you that it is your responsibility to die so that your children can have a better life. These are choices that people can never make freely because there's going to be so much social pressure acting on them to certain ways. At the end of this, we tell you that no choice could ever be made freely. And when it comes to something as fundamental as life, no unfree choice should ever be accepted in society. Secondly, on the individual, this is material they wanted to win on because they told you an individual's life can be made materially better off by letting them die. We tell you that this is a total oversimplification of life. We tell you that if you implement this policy, you reduce life down to being a cog in an economic machine where people buy into narratives that their life is just the sum of the dollars and of their attractiveness. We tell you implement these, as you institutionalize those narratives, then people begin to buy into them. That necessarily means that people are just not going to be happy because they don't recognize life as a sum of relationships and all these kinds of things. They just recognize it as its economic parts. It's going to make them way less happy because they're never going to live up to those expectations. We told you down the line that you're going to disadvantage people unnecessarily because everyone's going to get this. So it's not going to get you a better job. It's just going to make you an overqualified garbage person that is going to die a bit younger. We tell you that people are going to live under systems of discrimination, even if it is necessarily true that someone gets a marginally better job, if someone experiences marginally less racism under their side of the house. We tell you that at an expense of the government having forced to, for instance, put into effect policies that limit those things far more broadly, because you can no longer say that it is your fault for being Black, you should have just dyed your skin, or it is your fault for being poor, you should have just had your brain changed. That removes all social capital. Briefly on society, the main contention here is about discrimination. They brought you nothing until third when they told you that now governments can see that everyone is changing their skin color, everyone's changing their intelligence. Look, that's only going to be a marginal effect. You're just going to play into like white supremacist views about people wanting all to be white, they're the dominant race. That's really bad under their side of the house. But crucially, we tell you that discrimination is fixed by everyone being around each other and being forced to cooperate. Under their side of the house, all you have to see is the perfect, pretty, whitewashed version of humanity, not its nitty-gritty truth. Thank you.
I thank the speaker for his speech, and I'd like to invite up Isaac to deliver the final speech in today's debate.
Madam Chair, let's be very clear about what we supported and had to support in today's debate, because we didn't have to support a world in which 50% of the population takes this, because we're quite happy for further social change, for further educational opportunities to be offered to these people. And what happens under our side of the house when that occurs? No one makes that decision, and we all go home and pack our bags, nice day at the office. But what we did support on our side of the house was giving those individuals who live in failed societies, who live in failed systems that have locked them out of any opportunity, that have locked them out of any decent quality of life because of how they look, because of what skills they have, because of their intelligence, we support giving them the choice. I told you at the start of the debate that we're Team Freedom, and we fundamentally haven't changed down our line. We're so proud to offer individuals that choice. 2 points in today's debate. Firstly, whether there is a principal obligation for the state to give individuals the ability to make this trade-off, and secondly, whether making this choice improves the individual's quality of life. Firstly then, let's take a look at this principal contention, because right down our line, we told you that individuals have a right to their own bodily autonomy because they own and control their body, and they know what is best for them and what they want to prioritize. This means that an individual is able to trade off years of their life for improvements in their quality of life. Look, we gave you an example right down the line of smoking and how we allow individuals to smoke, even though that reduces their quality of life. And the only substantive response we had from that was that, oh, we give them heaps of information and we put an age limit on that. This is really crucial in today's debate, because crucially, that is the same restrictions that we put on this type of policy too. So clearly, insofar as side of NEG are happy to concede that we make a fair and free choice around smoking when we put those restrictions in, they are also happy to concede that this will be a fair and free choice. The only real pushback on this was that this is an irrational decision based on imperfect information. I've given you multiple responses to this. We've told you that we just refute the characterization that this is always going to be 20-year-olds, because a lot of the time, they don't know their life outcomes and are likely to hold off to see how they go. The people who are using this have been systematically locked out of jobs, of family, of any form of affection. We want to give them an option. But secondly, we've just told you that they understand the significance of this decision. And the whole of Side Neg's case was about the sanctity of life and how we should make sure it's a rational decision. We think that this completely just shows how significant we take the idea of someone's life. That was literally the crux of Millie's introduction. People aren't going to be coerced into this. People make a legitimate choice. We support giving them the option to do that if they've been failed by a state. Secondly, then, let's take a look at whether this trade-off improves an individual's quality of life. Because we told you right down our line that we're the only side of the house that allows these individuals to escape the shackles of their trait, of their appearance. They escape poverty, they escape discrimination. And crucially, Millie's material and the Side Neg's material about offering new things to stop these things, stop this discrimination occurring, is great. And we can co-opt that on our side of the house. But the fundamental problem is, if it still exists to even some extent on their side of the house, they don't have an option to solve it. We do provide individuals that choice, that ability to escape their situation. At the end of this debate, we need to consider what these two worlds look like, because we still get social change on both sides of the house. We still fix a lot of problems. But if there are problems on our side of the house, we give individuals the ability to change their situation and improve their quality of life. That is something that I'm so proud to support.